Hey guys, today's episode is going to be just a little bit different. I have been rehearsing a talk for a conference coming up this weekend called Pioneer Nation, and my talk is on 7 of the biggest lessons I've learned from 10 years in entrepreneurship, and I thought you guys would be into it as well. So I'm going to share with you my notes and slides, and let's get into it. Money isn't the point. A business should be about lifestyle, impact, and meaning. And you could still earn a ridiculous amount of money without sacrificing any of that. But you need to set your priorities. And that, to me, is what a lifestyle business is all about. In late 2008, I was in a bad place. The financial world had collapsed and everyone was freaking out. It's funny how quickly forget, but this was a really big deal at the time. You guys remember how bad this was? Nobody knew how bad things would get, and it wasn't just the big investment banks and retail banks who were scared. Venture capitalists were also freaked out. I mentioned venture capitalists because at the time I was running a venture-backed startup. We had raised a couple $1 million 2 years before, and we're coming to the end of our runway. It was time to raise money again, and the timing really couldn't have been worse. It didn't help that we had no revenue at that point, but this is common in the startup world. You build a free service as big as you can, and then you monetize it later. If it works out, boom, you're Twitter. If it doesn't work out, you're usually left with very little aside from experience. Venture capitalists know that this is how things work. In fact, they bet on it. Literally, they bet on it. They bet on dozens or hundreds of companies and count on just a few of those to turn into unicorns, which is what they call billion-dollar-plus startups. A handful of others do okay, and most of the rest eventually fail. This is all built into the system. I knew all of this when I decided to co-found a startup. I knew it was a lottery ticket. But what I didn't count on was a complete collapse of the financial world. I'll spare you the details except for this. After pitching over 20 VCs, the best we could do was a small keep the lights on investment from our existing investors. The terms were terrible, and the amount was only enough to keep a few people on while we looked for a potential buyer for the business. This meant I had a tough decision to make. Should I stay on and try to keep our sinking ship afloat? Or was it time to admit defeat and say goodbye to the business I had poured 3 years of blood, sweat, tears, and money into? I painfully decided to move on for lots of reasons. Now, looking back, the end came at just the right time for me. I look back at my departure from that startup as one of the best things that has ever happened to me. And here's why. Despite raising $3 million in venture capital and despite being my own boss, this version of entrepreneurship didn't feel like I thought it should. I actually had less control over my life than I did in my previous life as a high-pressure Fortune 500 consultant. I had a co-founder, multiple investors, a board of directors, advisors, employees, a physical office, and no specific goal for growing our business other than get big as fast as possible. I was stressed to the max and had felt continually exhausted and trapped. If my experience was what entrepreneurship had to be, then I'm pretty sure I wasn't cut out for it. So my startup collapsed and the experience cost me financially. But I was left with several incredibly valuable lessons. And the first lesson is this. There are many different versions of entrepreneurship. You, as the entrepreneur, have to decide what matters to you, and you have to guard your vision and your priorities carefully. If you don't, your business can easily turn into an all-consuming tyrant. Luckily, there are many ways to build a business, and some of those ways are far less risky and lead to much better lifestyles for you as the entrepreneur. A startup is essentially a lottery ticket. Very few win, but the winners who do win big, and the losers tend to get nothing. What you guys are trying to build is much more likely to succeed. There are far more winners. I personally know dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of people who have built small, meaningful, profitable, sustainable businesses. You probably won't build a billion-dollar business, but money really isn't the point anyway. Freedom, impact, working on something you deeply care about, living your ideal lifestyle. These are all things that are much easier to achieve with a small independent business than they are with a startup. After I decided to walk away from my startup, the big question was, what next? Instead of jumping into the next thing right away, I knew I needed to hit the reset button in a major way. You see, I had always jumped from one career opportunity to the next without taking time to consider what I really wanted, other than more money or more status, sort of the default options. I knew I wanted to start another company, but the thought of having to start over completely was devastating. I needed time to clear my head and recharge my batteries. So I did what anybody would do in that situation, and I bought a Subaru Forester. No, I'm kidding. We bought a Subaru Forester, but it's because my wife and I decided to set off on an 8-month-long road trip sabbatical to Mexico with our dog. We had always dreamed of taking a sabbatical, and we had always romanticized the idea of getting to know the real Mexico. This seemed like the perfect time, and we were excited. So we packed our 2005 Subaru Forester, and we set off. My plan on that trip was really to relax, enjoy the trip, and to clear my head, and then eventually come up with a new idea for a startup. But this time, to focus on maintaining more control over how the company was built. I knew I needed to be more intentional about how I would build the company. I also wanted to get to profitability right away, so fundraising or a market crash wouldn't be able to control my fate. But something really unexpected happened on that trip. We kept meeting people who weren't rich and they weren't retired, but they had somehow figured out ways to live in a foreign country for months every year. These people managed to make their careers work around their lives instead of the other way around. And there were lots of them. And this rocked my foundation because up until this point, I thought that either you got a good corporate job and tried to climb the ladder as quickly as possible, or that you became an entrepreneur and you swung for the fences doing anything it takes to build a huge business so that you could then retire and do what you really wanted to do with your life. I didn't know it then, but I was essentially experiencing the parable of the Mexican fisherman in real life. The more I thought about it, the more I started asking myself, how did I want my career and life to fit together? And so on a whim, I decided to start a blog. I started the blog to chronicle our trip, to ask myself questions in public about what I wanted from my life and my career, and to tell the stories of these incredible people we were meeting. Soon after starting the blog, I found out about topics like digital nomading, lifestyle design, and location independence. It turns out there was something big brewing, and I happened to be at the right place at the right time. That same financial collapse that killed my startup ironically created an opportunity for me to get involved in a movement of people who were forced to ask tough questions about work and life. About a month into blogging, I realized I loved it. It brought back memories of running my high school newspaper, and it allowed me to start a dialogue with people around the world about the nature of career and life and the balance between them. Around that time, I also started to wonder, could I make a living from blogging? I mean, people were reading my site. That must be worth something, right? Well, that's exactly when I discovered this article. When I started poking around, Googling, how do you make money from a blog? This article came out. This had been published about a month before I started blogging. As soon as I read it, I thought, shit, I'm too late. This guy, Dan Lyons, had been blogging as what he called the fake Steve Jobs at a site called The Secret Diary of Steve Jobs. And this site became very popular. Dan said that over the course of an entire month, however, in which his site was visited by 1.5 million people, I earned a whopping total of $1,039.81. So here I am thinking, oh my God, I'm too late. This blogging thing is over. Some sites like TechCrunch and Gizmodo had become worth millions, but now this guy only earned $1,000 from 1.5 million page views. And of course, in the first month of my blog, I had just 1,880 page views, a far cry from 1.5 million. In advertising terms, my site was probably worth pennies, literally. Of course, looking back, it's ridiculous to think that I was too late, knowing what I know now. And I know many of you are listening to this and thinking the exact same thing. You're wondering, am I too late? Has this whole independent entrepreneurship thing passed me by? Well, it turns out that I wasn't too late at all. If anything, I was actually a little early. Does anybody remember this ebook from Chris Guillebeau? This came out in April of 2009, almost a month after I started blogging. It turned out that blogging as a business model was really just getting started. People like Chris were figuring out that earning revenue via advertising was basically a waste of time. They were opting for other methods of earning an income by selling things directly to their audience. And others like ProBlogger and Copyblogger were really explaining the ins and outs of building a business online with content at the center as they were figuring it out. So here's the thing. You can't worry about being too late. The rules have changed. This isn't the Old West where once the land claims were gone, there were no more. Online, everything is reinvented constantly. Think about when I started blogging just 5 years ago. Services like Pinterest and Instagram and Stripe and Slack and Intercom, those didn't even exist. And those tools are now so essential to so many entrepreneurs. In fact, podcasting was barely a thing when I started. And podcasting as a vehicle for driving customers to an online business was definitely not a thing. But now a huge portion of our customers at Fizzle come from our podcast. And that's something I never could have imagined. So I wasn't too late, I was too early. You have no idea what the next few years will bring. Your job is to get skin in the game now so that you're ready to be an early adopter on the right platforms when they're invented. They're still giving out land claims today. You just have to be smart enough to be ready for them. Think about it. None of this meaning trying to build an independent business online, none of this was even possible just 10 or 15 years ago. Working remotely, building a one-person independent business from anywhere in the world, forget it. That didn't exist. Luckily, I decided to ignore the mainstream media opinion that you can't make money from blogging, and instead, I listened to people like Chris Guillebeau, Leo Babauta of Zen Habits, and Brian Clark of Copyblogger and Darren Rouse of ProBlogger. I obsessed over becoming a better writer and over figuring out how to build an audience. I worked hard, really hard, to connect with every blogger in this new space that I was talking about. And I wrote and wrote and wrote, even when no one was listening. My hard work started paying off, and by the end of that first year of blogging, there was even a month where over 100,000 people visited my site in a single month. But even after all this hard work, I still hadn't made a dollar. I still fell into the same trap that I had before. Even though I had vowed to get to profitability faster with this business, I was in a similar place to where I was with my startup after a year. Lots of attention, but no revenue. It turns out that I was making a huge mistake that many of you are probably making right now. You see, I wanted to build a business. I wanted independence. I wanted to do something I loved for a living. Me, me, me. Listen carefully. Your business, no matter what you think, isn't about you. No matter how much you think about yourself and what you want, it isn't about you. Maybe you've heard of The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. The Hero's Journey is a very classic form of drama. The best example is probably Star Wars. George Lucas used the Hero's Journey template to write the screenplay for Star Wars. When you give a talk like I'm giving right now, It's really easy to think of yourself as a hero. I'm here sharing my story with you. I'm the hero. But that's wrong. If I treat myself like the hero in this talk, it falls flat. You tune out and write me off as a narcissist. I'm not the hero today. You are. I'm Yoda. You're Luke. You're the one who will save the universe. I'm just here today to inspire and guide you and share what I've learned. And this exact same logic applies to your business. You want to build a business. You want independence. You want to travel the world and earn a living and become wealthy and famous and respected. You. We see this all the time in the independent entrepreneur community. The most common business ideas that we see tend to be based around personal development, making money online, lifestyle design, life coaching. These are all things that you want for yourself. You're obsessed with these things, so you naturally start a business about it. I made that exact same mistake for a whole year after I started blogging. I talked about what I wanted instead of trying to find a Luke Skywalker who I could play Yoda to. Now, here's the key here about being Yoda. In order to be Yoda, you have to be capable of leading Luke on his journey. You have to be credible and experienced in the thing that you're leading him on. After that discovery, that's when I made a big shift and I started a new blog called Think Traffic. This time, instead of focusing on what I wanted, I focused on helping someone achieve something specific that I was capable of delivering. In the case of Think Traffic, I helped people grow audiences online. I'd been building audiences online since 2004, and I was constantly asked by other people who wanted to grow their own audiences, how do you do it? It seemed like this was something people wanted, and I turned out to be right. And Think Traffic laid the groundwork for a very successful one-person business. And that's really the secret. That's your primary mission. Simply to make something people want, as Paul Graham says. Seriously, the formula for creating a successful business is incredibly simple. You have to make something people want, then find enough of those people, and finally sell it to them for a price they're willing to pay. That's it. Those are the 3 rules of creating a successful business. So the question really then becomes, how do I do that? How do I make something people want? And how do I find enough of those people? And that really brings us back to our Yoda metaphor. I want to change that a bit. Yoda isn't the perfect metaphor because you're not some wise 900-year-old Jedi master. There's a danger here in romanticizing the entrepreneur as some genius who comes up with the perfect idea out of thin air. Some entrepreneurs are visionaries, but a lot of crazy people have visions too. You probably aren't Steve Jobs or Richard Branson, and that's okay because I'm not either, but we can still be successful with the right strategy. So instead of thinking of yourself as this genius with all the answers, we need to act like scientists, and we need to treat our businesses like hypotheses. You have to put on your lab coat and grab your clipboard. Building a business is a matter of developing a hypothesis. For example, let's say you're into yoga, and you have a hypothesis like this. People who want to learn yoga would prefer to do it at home because they're embarrassed about doing yoga in public. Those people will pay for access to unlimited online yoga training videos. Okay, at this point, you don't know if this is going to work or not. You are a scientist. This is your idea, and you set out to prove whether or not that hypothesis is correct. So you have to test that hypothesis. Instead of trying to shape reality to fit your vision, you shape your vision to fit reality. If it turns out that people don't want to pay for your yoga videos because there are too many great free ones on YouTube, then you need to change your hypothesis. This iterative cycle, it's really the heart of entrepreneurship. New entrepreneurs make this mistake of assuming that building a business is a linear experience. You build the product, you find an audience, you grow your sales. For some, this is true, but usually only if there's luck involved or if you have lots of experience as an entrepreneur. In reality, most of us build businesses through iterations. We try to build something people want, But when we show them this thing, we learn that it doesn't solve their problems exactly. So we have more work to do, and that's fine. You go back and design a different experiment. You refine your idea and present it again. You rinse and repeat. It turns out that entrepreneurship is really just a series of guesses and risks. And the entrepreneurs who succeed are those who make educated guesses and take calculated risks. You make a guess and you see if you're right. Along the way, you try to contain your risk as much as possible. And the biggest risk you'll face as an entrepreneur is the risk of building something nobody wants. Imagine spending many months or years on a product only to find out nobody wants it. This tragically happens all the time. So, how do you limit this risk and make better guesses? Well, this is what the whole lean startup revolution is all about. You may have heard of the lean startup. It's essentially a method for building businesses that is meant to help you make better guesses and take smarter risks. It's really just trying to take the guesswork out of building a business. And it turns out there are other frameworks. In fact, we've built our own framework inside of Fizzle. We call it the Fizzle Small Business Roadmap. So here are the other keys that I found to reducing your risk and improving your guesses from lean startup and from other frameworks like the roadmap we teach inside of Fizzle. So the first, following a proven framework is always a good idea. You might choose lean startup or the Fizzle roadmap or something else that's developed by your favorite entrepreneurship teacher or program. The point is, building a business is becoming a process, and there's no need anymore to reinvent the wheel. Second, you should borrow from businesses that work. If you think about the biggest startups today, from Uber to Airbnb to Slack, these startups were all built on existing business models that they simply tweaked and improved for the modern era. There's no need to try to invent something that's never been thought of before. In fact, that's usually a losing strategy. That only works if you have deep pockets and a lot of time and a lot of patience. And you probably have none of those. You need to build a business that works now, not something that could work 10 years from now. So don't reinvent the wheel, borrow from a business model that already works. That's what we did with Fizzle. And I'll tell you more about that in just a second. Next, you need to talk to customers as much as possible. It sounds silly, but in my first startup, we barely talked to customers ever. We saw ourselves as some iconoclastic geniuses who knew everything that we needed to know to build a product that people wanted, and it was just a matter of perfecting that product. But it turns out that talking to customers is the best way to get feedback, and it's the best way to reduce the risk that you have of making something nobody wants. Next, you need to efficiently test your hypothesis. It's fine to come up with a hypothesis, but if you make that theory too big, if you guess about too much, the chance of you building something that nobody wants becomes bigger, and the risk is bigger because you've put more time, more effort, and more money into it. So you have to efficiently test your hypothesis. And this is what the concept of a minimum viable product is all about, something that they talk about a lot in the lean startup. The idea is to put something out there that is the minimum amount of effort you can to start getting feedback from people so that you can iterate and improve on what you've built. Finally, you need to create a support system of other entrepreneurs. When you decide to be an entrepreneur, you automatically become a crazy person to a lot of people around you. A lot of people around you are thinking, who does he or who does she think she is to build a business? Why does she get to do that when I have to work this crappy job that I hate? And those people around you are going to drag you down. And it's easy for you to start thinking to yourself, well, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just give up. But that support system that you build of other entrepreneurs, that's what will keep you on track. That's what will keep you motivated, and it'll show you what's possible and make you believe in yourself. This formula is what we used to build my latest business, Fizzle, that I've mentioned a couple of times. Fizzle is an online training library and community for entrepreneurs. To build Fizzle, we borrowed from business models that work. We looked at lynda.com and Treehouse primarily. These are membership sites for training communities. We followed the lean startup methodology. We built and launched our minimum viable product in just 7 weeks, and we got it out there. Then we talked with customers and got feedback that we used to improve the product. Since then, we've been iterating over and over and growing at 50 to 100% per year. And here's the thing about iterations. You get better with every iteration. I've had a few successes and I've had a dozen failures, and I'm sure that I'll have more failures in the future, but the odds of succeeding improve with every iteration. And for you, you need to think of entrepreneurship not as I get one shot in this, but how do I put just enough skin in the game so that I can prove whether or not this business idea works? And if it doesn't, how can I live to see another day? Because with each iteration, you will get better. And if you keep at it, you'll eventually have that breakthrough that you're looking for. By the way, this photo that you're watching, if you're watching this over video, those are the crazy fools that I work with: Chase Reeves, Steph Crowder, myself, and Barrett Brooks. And we really do have a lot of fun. And that all comes back to one of the points that I made earlier. Let's review. How you build your business matters just as much as what you build. And you, as the entrepreneur, have to decide what visions and priorities matter to you, and you have to defend those. Because if you don't, your business can turn out to be this all-consuming tyrant that you don't like anymore. Remember as well that startups are lottery tickets, but I don't want you to confuse what you're trying to build with the startup world. The startup world is sexy and we hear about it all the time, so it's easy to romanticize it and it's easy to think that what you're building is a startup. It's not. What you're building is just a matter of time and effort. It's much easier to build a small, profitable, sustainable, bootstrapped, meaningful business that puts food on the table and allows you to live the lifestyle that you're looking for than it is to build a startup, because startups have all this pressure to become the next billion-dollar success story. You're not too late either. If you're thinking that you're too late, instead realize that you're just in time for the next big thing. You don't know what's going to be invented tomorrow or a month from now or 6 months from now. But if you start working on an idea now, you'll position yourself to take advantage of that next big idea when it comes around. Also remember that you're not the hero in your business, your customer is. It's really easy, because you like to think about what you want from your business, to put yourself in that hero's seat. But it turns out that you're more like Yoda to Luke. Your customer is the hero. Your customer is Luke Skywalker, and your customer will save the universe. The secret to building a successful business is simply to make something people want, find enough of those people, and charge a fair price. And in order to do that, you need to treat your business like a hypothesis, and you need to treat yourself like a scientist. You don't know everything about what's going to happen in your business. You're simply testing out ideas and trying to get feedback on whether or not people really want the thing you've built. And finally, remember that entrepreneurship is really just a series of guesses and risk. And the most successful entrepreneurs make educated guesses and take calculated risks so that they live to see another day, because you realize that you get better with each iteration. These 7 lessons have been invaluable to me, and I hope that you've taken something away from it. If you like this video and you're into the idea of independent entrepreneurship, into lifestyle businesses, you can subscribe to get weekly curated emails from me with links to all kinds of interesting things that will help your journey as a lifestyle entrepreneur. And also, I do a weekly show called Lifestyle Business Weekly, which you're watching right now. So you can subscribe over at lifestylebusinessweekly.com. I'm Corbett Barr, and I'll see you next time.